Hey, welcome to Root Family Podcast, where we can draw families closer to God by going deeper in what He's really saying in His scriptures, in and through us.
Hey friends, welcome to the Root Podcast. I am so glad you're joining us as we dive into a subject today that some people really struggle with. A lot of actually families don't even put any time of thought into this, and because their kids' spiritual lives are lacking. And I don't want that for your kids. I don't want your family to experience this. I want your family to have a spiritually strong and mature, well-grounded spiritual life for all of your kids and yourself, but especially for your kids. That's what we're talking about today. And so let's dive into this. What does it look like to have kids speaking in tongues in the home? How do we encourage it? Can we encourage it? Should we encourage it? Those are a lot of questions running through parents' heads, even as we're talking right now. And you're thinking, I don't even know if I want to open that can of worms, because I don't know if I feel like I'm prepared to be able to coach my kids through speaking in tongues, especially since everybody has their own secret code language, is what we call it in root classes. And here's the truth. God has made you the parent. He's given you these kids because only you are best situated, prepared, and equipped out of anyone in the entire world to lead your kids into the spiritual truths and the things that God has for them. That's why He gave them to you. And that once we get a hold of that reality, it changes our perspective, because instead of being hesitant and not wanting to venture into things as a family or even as a parent, we realize, hey, you know what? God has already equipped me with everything that I need for a life of godliness, and to be able to equip my kids to step into all that God has for them as well. And so that is the first hurdle. I'm telling you, once you can cross that hurdle, life gets so much sweeter, because you're not constantly doubting yourself or downplaying yourself, but you're looking at how big God can be through you in the lives of your kids. And God's a good God. He's a good daddy. He's a good parent. And He can teach you and work through you the things that He wants to put into your kids. And so what does this have to do with speaking in tongues? It means everything to do with speaking in tongues. Can your kids, all right, let's start here. Can your kids speak in tongues? Yes, they totally can. So in the light of eternity, your 20 or 30 or 40 years that you have on your kids is really nothing compared to all of eternity that we will live with Christ in heaven, if you're saved, I guess. And most likely, from what we can tell, I'm not even going to go there. I'm cutting myself off. So, in regards to eternity, your kids are not hardly at all behind you at all. And in reality, if God really has given us everything that we need for a life of godliness, then they already have the ability to receive God's gifts, right? Can you find a spot in the Bible that tells you elsewhere? I would love if you can find that, share that with me, because that would really be interesting. As far as I can study, I have not been able to find anything that would say speaking in tongues is dependent on a certain age. No, it's really just dependent on their willingness to let the Spirit speak through them, their willingness or desire to be filled with the Holy Spirit. And okay, so let's go here. Can they be filled with the Holy Spirit with the evidence of speaking in tongues? We went in class, we talked about that it's just one of the evidences. If you look in Acts 1:8, we're going to get into this next week in root classes. It's going to be so good. We're going to open the door to talking about the Holy Spirit power and talking about gifts of the Spirit all through February. So if you haven't signed up for a root class, check it out. It is going to be a powerful month as we not only attempt to teach on these gifts, but we open the door for the Holy Spirit to flow through these gifts and let the kids, hey, we learned about words of wisdom today. So let's see if God or the Holy Spirit will speak through us words of wisdom to one another. And we're going to let the Holy Spirit do his thing. Why not, right? Why not give him the space to be bigger than we can imagine? Why not build the kids' expectation that God is so much bigger than we've allowed him to be in our life before? And this is the best time to set that ceiling high for our kids of their expectation, of their hope, of their belief in who God can be in and through them. And so, speaking in tongues for kids, yes, they can. They totally can. And how do you know if they're really doing it or if they're faking it? Ooh, that is a good question. Ask God. You have a good God who will teach you. He will show you. And you'll either have, like we've talked about before, that little check on the inside. I don't think that's right. Or, yeah, I think that could be right. Now, don't pay attention. You'll have all the arguments potentially going through your head about this couldn't be. What if it is? What if it's not? How I might be a bad parent if I tell him it's not and it really is, and all these questions. Skip that. You might even need to get yourself in a place where you're connected with God ahead of time so that when you get into this time of encouraging your kids to step into allowing the Holy Spirit flow through them in this way, you're prepared spiritually. I would say that's probably the biggest thing as parents. We dive into things without any preparation, and that's what usually causes us to fail. We don't think ahead. We just are not ready in season and out of season. And so when the moment comes and you're in the car or around the dinner table and the kids bring up, hey, when we're praying, can we speak in tongues? We learned about that in root class or learned about that at church. And you're like, especially when you know your kids are learning this, you gotta focus on it a little bit. Add it in, focus on speaking in tongues. Listen to some teaching on speaking in tongues or being filled with the Holy Spirit or the gifts of the Holy Spirit, which is what we're going to talk about in February in Root Bible Academy. So can they? What do you do? So if you feel that little check on the inside, I'm not sure if this is right, then just talk to them about it. Hey, I'm not sure. I don't know for sure, but are you just copying sounds that you've heard? Or are you saying the sounds that you feel like are coming from the inside? And they might say, I don't know. I'm just trying to speak in tongues like you or like the pastor or like whatever, Encourage them to stop and listen. This is a huge time where you can teach your kids to be aware of the Holy Spirit's leading, their voice on the inside. We've talked about before, a couple weeks ago, about the stirring, about the good or the negative responses, the green light or red light, the thumbs up or the thumbs down on the inside. This is taking it to another level where we're now listening for sounds that don't make sense to our mind, but it doesn't mean it's not a language. It's our secret code language that only our spirit and God knows. That was my description for tongues for kids, in case you're wondering. So, have them check in. Pause for a second. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, let's pause. Let's check in with the Holy Spirit. I want to make sure we're actually speaking in tongues. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't think... Some people say, hey, just make sounds until you feel like there's weight on something that the Holy Spirit did. I wouldn't do that. And I also wouldn't say, hey, make the same sounds that I'm making when I pray in tongues, and then maybe that'll work into something. I think each one of us has our own secret code language, and so I think that could be misguiding them slightly. So I'd stay away from that. So you're like, what do they have left? They have listening and speaking. Listening, speaking. And that's how it is for all of us when we are learning a language here on the earth, right? We don't speak words that we haven't heard. It would be impossible, right? And so for our kids to step into who God has created them to be in a spiritual gift, then they need to get used to also listening, but with their spirit. and learning that secret code language. So what should we do? How can we make this a part of our life? We've been talking about it all month en route. We want this to be a regular part. I mean, think about it. If speaking in tongues strengthens or builds up our spirit man, enables us to pray out mysteries, enables us to pray out God's perfect plan. And there's so many positives to speaking in tongues. Not allowing or making this a part of everyday life for our kids is kind of doing a disservice almost. And so how do we encourage it? Well, add it in to a time in your everyday routine already. Maybe it's around the breakfast table. You guys are just chatting about the day, seeing what God might have for you to do that day, what he wants to say to you. Add speaking in tongues into that. Maybe it's bedtime prayer. Add some tongues time into that. There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe it's driving in the car and you're on your way to school, or to drop them off at school, or pick them up afterwards, and getting that spiritual reset would be a fantastic time. It's way better than putting on some kind of video for them to watch that just entertains them and keeps them away. It's way better than throwing on a video or listening to the radio. This can turn into a spiritual impartation time, spiritual activation time for the kids to really work on building themselves up and developing this spiritual gift that God has given them. All right, so hopefully that gives you some help. I don't want to go too long with this. I just really want to shoot some things out to you to make it real in the day and encourage you that you can do this. You're the parent. God has positioned you in their life to be the spiritual leaders of the home, of your kids. And so step into that role. Believe that God is big enough through you to enable you, in a sense, or allow him to flow through you to teach your kids to be who he wants them to be, to build up their spirit person, to strengthen them, to pray out mysteries and see amazing testimonies, even start to recognize, believe God that he'll give them the interpretation of their own tongues. Can that happen? Yeah, we're going to talk about that in an upcoming podcast. But as for me, I'm cutting this off. I want to thank you for joining me. If you have questions, email me. You can reach me at josh@rootbible.com, or post it on our Facebook page, private message us. We'd love to chat with you. My wife is busy getting MeWe accounts and all the other alternative social media accounts for those of you that are migrating off Facebook. That'll give you an opportunity to still stay connected with us, so you'll be able to search us out and find us there as well. All right. Thanks. Now, go do it. Be the parent that God's created you to be. Bye.